Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Leon. I'm joined today with Tim. We'll be your host today for using technology to communicate clearly in a crisis. Today's agenda, what we'll be covering off, we're looking to talk about pivoting between communications from BAU to in a crisis, communication challenges that are commonly faced by teams when in these high-pressured situations, operating off a single source of truth, the benefits of a tool like CQ Command to assist you in communicating in a crisis, and then obviously we'll open up to questions to yourselves throughout the session. A little bit about ourselves. My name's Leon. I'm the Client Success Manager for Catalyst Technologies. That's the tech arm of RiskLogic. I've been part of the wider RiskLogic business for about 3 years now. My beginning days were part of the resilience team supporting our clients in developing, training, exercising crisis management, business continuity and cyber response plans. And I'm joined today with Tim Archer, our Head of Communications.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Tim Archer is my name, as you can see on the slide. I'm Head of Communications here. I've spent 25 years in a wide variety of communications roles, and now I specialise in crisis communications, helping clients plan, train and exercise and be fully prepared for crisis situations. So that's my background. Great that you could join us. And,
excellent.
We'll get underway. There's a bit of housekeeping.
Yeah, I was about to say thank you. There's always a little bit of admin when we do these sorts of things. For those of you who haven't used our webinar tool before, just so you know, the little tile you can see in the corner behind the slide, if you hover your mouse over, like where you can see Tim and I at the moment, you can actually resize us through the different sizes. Also, if you hover the mouse over the window, you'll get a little toolbar pop up, which will allow you to drop in your questions that we can address towards the end of the session. I think that's it for now.
Yeah, we'll go for about 30 minutes, and if there are a lot of questions coming in, we're happy to run over 30 minutes to answer questions as much as we can.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're all aware of everyone's time pressures. So I think just a bit of a running flow, about 15-ish minutes or so of Tim about the communication principles. Then we'll tag into my side using CQ Command, and then over to you guys for questions and further discussion.
Great. Cool. Thanks, Leon. So obviously there's a big difference between business as usual communications and crisis communications. And in a crisis, there's obviously more noise, more pressure, more time constraints, and the expectations on the communications team go through the roof. So we all know that. And what we're going to talk about today is how to make your life easier as communicators using technology, using an online crisis management tool. And in terms of communicating, we're going to talk about internal and external communications, but when we talk about internal communications, I'm not talking about sending out staff messaging. I'm talking about that communication that has to happen within an organisation to assess the impact of a crisis, determine the strategy and roll out the response. So it's the communications within the teams, the crisis management team, the executive, the board, and all those people that need to be involved in that decision-making process as to how to respond to the crisis, as well as the second step is obviously external comms, that stakeholder communication strategy that also involves internal communications to staff. So that's what we're going to look at. And for simplicity's sake, and this is very top line, but in a business as usual situation, you've generally got 4 different components within a business. So you've got the board, you've got the executive, and part of that executive, or within that executive, or below the executive, you've got the operations team, and I'm using that as a very catch-all label to say pretty much everyone in your business who actually produces and provides and supplies and delivers your goods and services.
So it's like your client-facing support teams, customer service, frontline staff if you've got them, operations, logistics, IT operations.
Absolutely.
Everything.
So it is a very catch-all term for the sake of this webinar. So, and then of course the comms team. So in business as usual, the process of gathering information, determining the strategy and rolling out the strategy it's reasonably linear, isn't it? So, but information can come into an organisation from multiple different points, from all over the organisation. They can come in a board, executive operations level, or at comms. So this next slide demonstrates that where your information can come in. It can be complex, but generally in business as usual, you've got time to assess the information, assess the impact, determine the strategy, come up with the strategy, and then communicate it. So again, in business as usual, that process can take days or weeks or months, depending on the size.
Depending on the nature of some of our more public-facing projects, we might see a couple of months. I think we've definitely seen that happen in time.
Absolutely.
Or I suppose some fast-moving events that affect some big household names can be within a matter of hours. You need to get some form of response in.
Yeah, that's right. So an example, and I don't want to labour this point, but the example might be a board member or your chairman gets a briefing from a government minister about some new government policy. And that board member takes it down to the executive, the operations team, so to speak, work with the executive to assess the information, look at the risk or the opportunity that change in government policy might create for your business. And then strategy is decided and then it's communicated. Again, very top line, but I guess what I'm saying is that's a reasonably linear process that is done every day of the week in every organisation. But at crisis time, that process becomes much more complex because the volume of information is anywhere between 10 and 100 times greater. It's coming in from all sorts of different directions. Most of the information coming in your door is critical information. It's really important information, but some of it's peripheral noise that is simply making the room noisy, and some of it's just completely wrong. It might be a myth or inaccurate information. And the information as a crisis unfolds, it's always changing. There are many unknowns, facts are grey, so there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's what makes crisis communication so difficult. It creates pressure and stress.
I think the big thing there, we've seen it in both real life and in exercising environments, that information is not coming in a controlled manner in the sense, like you said, quantity of one, but also at all levels. You've got your next door neighbour, your family, your former colleagues, your industry partners all coming in trying to obtain information at one time.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely makes that sharing element.
Yeah, so it's hard to get a handle on the scale and the impact of that response. And I guess to use a sporting analogy, it's like the goalposts continually moving the goalposts as to where you need to go. And I'd take that a step further and say it's like a thick fog descends on your playing field. So not only the goalposts moving, you can't see where the try line is, you can't see where your sidelines are, and sometimes it's hard to see, in fact, where your own players are. So getting everyone to run in the same direction can be really challenging. So, and we see it with when there's very little large time constraints, and also to compound the issue, you might have your executive or your board or your key crisis management team members scattered in various different locations. Funnily enough, crises don't seem to occur when your crisis management team is all together in head office. You've got people at conferences, airports, off sick, away on annual leave, and they're scattered to the wind. So
10 o'clock on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, exactly. And in situations like that, when you've got people dispersed, that process of communicating within those teams, that internal decision-making communication, is very difficult and can easily get bogged down and overrun by the events and situations. So by the time you brief the board, for example, and that might take maybe 15 minutes or it could take half an hour, but in that time, the situation may have changed completely. Yep. So that's, I think everyone knows that, and sorry to labour the point, but I wanted to talk about that lineal model of communication and how it can create inefficiencies in that decision-making process, and the fact that it's a really killer problem in crisis communications.
Definitely.
So what we need to do, the challenge is running in the same direction. It needs really efficient decision-making, and that requires really efficient internal comms. So the solution to that, I believe strongly, is shaking off that lineal model of communicating up and down your organisation and putting information right at the heart of the process. So you put the information right in the middle where everyone can see it, and they can see it in real time. And I guess it's like having a lazy Susan in the middle of your table, and you're throwing all the information onto that lazy Susan where the whole organisation can see it using an online crisis management tool. So you're centralising it so that information can be assessed, it can be updated, corrected, triaged, myths busted if required, and then take any noisy information that's not required and throw it off the lazy Susan, get it out of the way. And by then putting it all in the centre where all those teams can see it, you can triage it into facts and assumptions, absolute facts and assumptions that need to be either verified and either busted as a myth or turned into a fact. And what that does is create a single source of truth, or can be also called a common operating picture. So very similar terms. From a communications point of view, I like using that term single source of truth. It's got many applications. So it does make for a much more efficient impact assessment and accurate decision making under pressure.
Definitely. I think we saw in an exercise recently too, that example, just touching back on a point or two you made before about having to brief external parties and that information changing. You see someone, they get pulled out of the room. I think it was the team leader in the situation we were in.
The crisis management team leader, that's right.
They got pulled out of the room to brief a more senior body. By the time they returned, the complete landscape had evolved and changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the ability to operate and make decisions and not interrupt the response element is really that challenge we're trying to address with that single source that everyone has access to.
Yeah, for sure. So it was a really good example, and it was an exercise, and I think they lost about 15 to 30 minutes just going through that process.
Definitely.
And look, I guess this is where an online crisis management tool can also really help with communications teams, especially the approval process. And I just want to touch on approvals in a crisis, because you may have an agreed approval process around your external communications. It may be enshrined in a delegation of authority or your standard procedures, but sometimes the approval process for a crisis situation may be different. So you need to clearly articulate what your approval process is well in advance of a crisis and have that enshrined in your crisis communications plan. But in the first step of a crisis, generally your head of comms is determining that communication strategy, and that's a really important first piece that often gets dropped off. And your media manager or similar title is generally working on holding statement, key messages, and starting an FAQ and media release maybe. So in the first 30 to 60 minutes, those two documents are underway early, often using pre-approved messaging and so forth, or templated holding statements. But what's the approval process? So in a crisis, again, if you've got people scattered in various different locations and you need to get this in front of the crisis management team and approved quickly, putting it into the centre of that table is a really efficient way to do it. The approver can see it, the delegated approver, and maybe that's the head of the crisis management team. Again, every organisation is different on that approval level, but if it's well known and decided, you put it in the centre of the table, you can approve it, or the CMT can approve it and send it back to the comms team as approved. And everyone who's got access to this online system can see that it's been approved. So there's no questions about what are we doing on the comms front. It's there sitting on the table. Everyone can see it. It's been approved, and it gives a much greater confidence, especially at board level and executive level, that there's a good, robust communication strategy in place. So, like I said, make sure that approval process is enshrined in your crisis comms plan, and that everyone understands it. You don't want to rely on email to be sending out comms strategies or messaging and waiting on approvals. It'll be death by email, especially when your IT systems are down. So that touches on that approval process. And finally, I guess when all your IT systems are down, a crisis dashboard like the CQ Command that you're about to show us can be an absolute lifesaver, because when your IT systems are down, and in so many situations this is happening these days with cyber attacks and data breaches, disabling systems, a lot of your channels either become obsolete or severely restricted in terms of your efficiency to get your message out. So this system that Leon will show you allows you to preload your external stakeholder list and your obviously your staff lists as well, and sync it with your Active Directories so it's always up to date.
Yep.
And at any time you can send emails and text messages to those groups of people. That is really a backup system. It can either be your primary system or your backup system for communicating in a crisis. So that's enough of me talking. Let's have a look at the tool
thank you
that
very
is
much.
CQ
And
Command.
I think I'm pretty proud of how we transitioned there. That worked out very well.
Nice.
Definitely, CQ Command, just for those who haven't come across it before, it's a software as a service, by which we mean a web-based tool. So if you do access it, you don't need to install anything locally. It doesn't need to be included into your physical network. All you need is a device that has public internet access and no username and password, and you're in. So when we're talking about IT disruptions, if your internal network is vulnerable, but you've got a personal computer or an external device that has general internet access, you'll be able to access those critical documents and tools to help you get on top of the situation. But it can be applied to any range of crisis events. CQ Command was built with 3 core elements in mind. It came out of our consulting experience over the last 15 so years in this space, and there was several common themes we found teams were constantly being faced with. One, the ability to understand early on the severity of the event and get the right people in the room. So we talk about having your crisis management team or your senior leadership team versed on different roles and tasks when things are going wrong, but when do you get them into the room? When do you make that decision to say we're in crisis mode or we all need to be in the room? So we've built it around proactively managing events. That's through early incident assessments and saying yes or no, and letting the right people know to get in the room and give them access to those crisis mode roles and responsibilities, lining up with what we were talking about earlier, BAU roles versus crisis management roles. So we all have fantastic experience when we're in those top level roles and we know what to do BAU. Things get a bit grey and you add in time pressure and then other potential really life-shattering decisions. You need a real clear defined set of tasks to begin your management of the event with. The second element's around situational awareness. So that's that info in the middle of that group of people we were talking about before, where CQ Command can potentially sit, where all the information's being dropped into one place to help you make those informed decisions to stabilise that situation. So that might be via triaging the information, delegating tasks out to other people, or sharing, if you've been emailed a media release or an article from a staff member, sharing with everyone so we don't have to access your computer, screenshots of social media posts, so on and so forth. And the third element that we're trying to address with CQ Command is that quick and effective communications. So the ability to get a message out to a wide audience very fast to try and reduce the amount of rumour that's starting to fly in those really high pressure situations.
Source of truth.
And distributing that single source of truth to everybody.
Absolutely.
So if there is a key message of, no, this has happened, make sure everyone knows who needs to know really fast.
So you're going to show us, yeah?
Yes, so enough of the one slide, and so bear with me just while I bring this up for you.
Change to presentation mode.
So what I'm going to be sharing with you all today is a live version. This is our sample version of CQ Command. If you're interested, we'll talk at the end about how you can get in touch with myself and my team to talk more about CQ Command. When a user logs in, they're faced with 3 core simple options. The ability to create a new event, so that's at beginning that assessment and activation piece. Jump straight into messaging, or if you've been activated and you've come to the party a few minutes later, you can join an event that's currently in progress. We're not going to focus too much on the activation piece today. I want to talk more about what we've been talking about, the situational awareness and the communication piece. So I'm going to use an example event we've had running for coming up on 4 to 6 months now. Now, I just want to preface, we haven't had a gas leak in Sydney for 6 months. It's just my example situation. What we've got here is our event dashboard. So what we've got here is a summary of information that the team can access. So now when I say team, I'm talking about that crisis management team or potentially that dedicated comms team, depending on your organisation or other operational response teams you might have in place. But again, when we log in, I can see that we've conducted an incident severity assessment and we've needed to declare an event. If I need to, I can activate additional resources or reconduct that assessment. An impact assessment summary. So this is based on our risk framework and actually understanding what are the areas of concern, what are the high level impacts that the event's currently posing to our organisation, and how should we be addressing them to help us stabilise that situation and maintain control. Again, this can be conducted repetitively as the event progresses. We've got an event location map. This will just drop pins on the affected sites within your organisation. So it's just more of an awareness to understand the scope of the event you're being faced with. We've got a couple of quick link features to activate additional teams, send a message, those documents I talked about before, briefings, or even close the event if need be. Next, we've got our team. So we've got our team structure. Now, this is based off our standard crisis management approach. We've got a team leader, support person, operational recovery. We can see who's been assigned to those roles, if they're potentially being shared by a person, as well as how they're progressing through those, as we mentioned earlier, those predefined roles and responsibilities, or those action plans that in any given event that person needs to do. So for example, here we might have Bryony, who might be our general PR person, but when the crisis button's pushed, she's our communications team member. So she's in crisis mode now and has a few tasks she needs to start working through. Then we've got our facts and assumptions boards, or our virtual whiteboards. Now, this is that information piece Tim and I have been talking about this morning. So here we've got the ability for any team member. Now, again, a team member is someone in that crisis team or a user of CQ Command. It's not your whole organisation, where we can just start dropping in information as we receive it. If anyone's been in a crisis or an exercise and you're getting information handed to you, you've got phone calls, you've got emails coming through, you're getting releases handed to you, we can simply add in that new piece of information. Just for as an example, it'll timestamp when the information's been added, and we can conduct that very first simple assessment on that information. So a fact, do I know that this is 100% true and that might drive me to do something? Or has this been passed to me by a source that I want someone to validate further on? We have the ability to, if need be, add attachments. So if that was a social media post, like we can see on the one conducted earlier, there might be screenshots of those sample content. It might be a physical printout of an email.
A photograph from the scene, or something that's happening actually on site.
Spot on. And the benefit of this board is this updates in real time. So again, we're talking about geographic dispersion. If I'm down in Melbourne and Tim's up here in Sydney, as I'm adding the information in, this is appearing on his screen in real time. We also have the ability to, as the information starts evolving, additional persons can start adding to that as well if we need to. We then can also translate this into tasks. So starting to actually action our stabilising the situation.
So you've just flipped screens there from the fact and assumption board to the task board now.
So we've got a number of whiteboards that, yes, they do indeed look similar. Again, that's around our design for ease of use, for lack of better words. So as Tim's just mentioned, we're transitioning from our recording and sharing of information to now maybe handing out or distributing tasks or delegating out tasks to additional people. So when we talk about tasks, there's two versions of that within CQ Command. One is those action plans for those predefined team members, but then we've also got the ability to instruct people to do things in our wider organisation or even external. So a perfect example could be we might need to obtain information. So I can add a new task, whatever that action is I want them to do, I drop into the description field. For example, I need Tim to approve our latest comm strategy. It'll include who's added it at what time, who it's been assigned to. The assignee function can be anyone we've preloaded in here, so the majority of your organisation or key other contacts, or you can add new ones on the fly. So if you're handed the building manager's name out of nowhere, you can add them in and send that message to them. They'll receive this as a text message and an email. We can also then add attachments. So that could be, if I've drafted up a comm strategy that I need Tim to approve, I've attached it, he receives an SMS. When he jumps into CQ Command, he can then access that and start viewing through it and provide his commentary on that matter.
So Leon added that that top line, please approve comm strategy. Just before we started the webinar, it prompted a text to my phone. I was able to pick it up, look at the strategy and say, yep, this is approved, send it back. And so, like I said, everyone can see it. Everyone knows what's going on in the latest information with the real-time
something we've talked about for anyone who's been in a prolonged event, so I think your more reputational or large-scale unrest sort of situation, think some of the bigger storms or larger incidents that happen overseas. We're pretty fortunate in Australia, I'm very happy to say. If I then tag out and someone now replaces me, if I've allocated that task to Tim but I've left, who now knows that I've sent it to him? So they've got the ability to look at it in there. There's a second way we can also address this via our notify contacts feature. So not only can I create a task, but I can also just send a generic email out of CQ Command to Tim and ask for his customized feedback. So I've got an example of one I prepared earlier here. I've sent a message at this time. This is the message, and it might have included an attachment saying, please approve. Now I've sent this as an email. I'm just moving my team out of the way here. So I can see that Tim's received it and he's actually responded. So Tim's actually approved that. So again, if we've done that handover, I might say to my replacement, hi, I've sent Tim the Comstrat to approve. I'm just waiting for his feedback. I've now got to go deal with my own thing. They've jumped in. Okay, yep, that's been approved. We can now proceed.
Yeah.
There was no need to pick up the phone, leave the room, get on the telco. It's just happening in the background.
Yeah.
We're trying to close that gap and make that ease of use a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to...
I'm just conscious of the time.
Yep.
We're approaching 11:30.
So the last thing I just wanted to touch on was that we talked about the ability to ask for information back into the system. So we can send out to those predefined contact lists one-way messages. An example here just might be an update to quell that rumour piece.
Yeah.
I can see here that it's been delivered successfully to 20 people via SMS. If I want to check who those persons are. Likewise, if I've sent out a polling request to those persons asking to confirm something, I can see what their responses were.
Sure.
So again, that ability, anyone on the team who's got access to this, though we can restrict who can communicate or access these for privacy reasons, we can share that amongst the team. So we're operating off that single source.
And it's not just staff lists, it's external lists as you need to preload in and make sure they're regularly synced up so that you're not struggling to tap into your CRM, for example, in the middle of an IT outage. So that's the absolute power of having a really robust online crisis management tool.
Definitely.
So now I think we need to move to questions. We're running close to time, and just while Leon's looking up any questions that have come in, bear with him. Happy to run over, but if you do need to keep going, we have recorded this and we'll send it out.
Yeah, so actually the first question was we'll be sending through slides. We will be recording this and we're going to be sending out an email at the end. I'll cover off admin-wise, just one, your feedback. We thrive on that and we want to assist you guys further. So please have a look at that when it comes. There'll be a link to watch this again if we've kind of touched on things a bit too quickly. There will also be a link to our additional webinars that we're continuing hosting. Our next one is next week. It's the next installment in our cyber series, focusing on the all systems are down.
Yep.
There'll be a registration link in that survey that we'll send you at the end of this as well. Another question we've got here, what about a tool contact with affected persons on the ground? People are using text, call groups, WhatsApp. Excellent question. So just to clarify there, this is focused, the CQ Command is focused on the team members themselves. We might have touched on it, but just to reiterate, the task allocation feature, you can externally send an SMS. They don't need an app or access to CQ Command. They can just respond. Likewise, if you're wanting to obtain those yes/no responses, they just receive a link in their SMS and that's fed back into CQ Command, but they don't need any training. It just looks like an SMS from a system for them.
Yeah. If you're talking about sub-teams under that crisis management team, for example, the comms team, and you simply need a tool to quickly update each other on what's happening and where people are and what's happening. I totally understand using WhatsApp or other Signal, other systems like that can be good. Remember, WhatsApp did have a security flaw in it recently, so make sure you've downloaded the latest version, but that's more down at the granular level. With the important decision-making information, we recommend you use CQ to put it all in the central location where everyone can see it.
Yeah.
Other questions? What have we got?
So we've got how do you recommend we communicate with staff if our systems are compromised through, say, a cyber attack? Yeah. Again, something we've tried to help with this situation is because CQ Command is not part of your internal network, it's externally managed through our own private secure cloud. And the benefit of SMS, it's sitting outside of general communication like email or Skype or Teams or whatever you might be using to help that external communication. It's quick and effective. Everyone has it in the most part when it comes to SMS. So we've tried to provide that solution to you there as well.
Yeah, and it can be synced with your Active Directory. So if someone leaves the organisation today, goes through the outboarding process, and they are removed from the Active Directory, that's then synced to ensure that the message is only going to current staff who are on board today.
Yeah, definitely. We've also got, does CQ Command allow SMS documents or links to documents via SMS? You can send out links via SMS. We can't do attachments just because depending on different phones and telephony networks, that's not that feasible, but you can send out links. Another example, virtual command centers. We've got a couple of clients now, when they activate a team, there's a link to a Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, or even Zoom. To get them virtually all in the one room to start sharing information. So you definitely can do the links part of it as well. I'm just having a quick look through for anything else. Would you load your entire crisis communications plan into CQ Command and roll it out using the software?
Yeah, you certainly can load the important or integral parts of the tools, the templates, the checklists that you have in your crisis communications plan. Certainly, your plan requires you to formulate a strategy first up and deliver that up to the CMT. Absolutely, you can put that strategy in there. But yeah, task lists, checklists, templated holding statements, there's no reason why you wouldn't. An FAQ document, for example, you might use your website as your single source of truth for your FAQs. Yes, you may need to get them approved, or you're doing them on the run, but just like, for example, we saw ANU yesterday suffer a data breach, and they've got an FAQ and various advice up on their website, front and centre, as the single source of truth. So yeah, some of it you'd put into CQ Command, others you'd once you do go external with your information, that's when you use your website.
Yeah, definitely. I think last question there, we've got, just again, interest of time, again, we've got our contact details up on the screen. Please feel free to jot them down and send through any questions direct to Tim or myself. But last one there is, can this manage events globally, i.e. mapping? So CQ Command can be accessed anywhere in the world. I haven't had anyone report it's not accessible in certain countries. I've used it in most of Asia, including China and other parts around the world, with fairly positive feedback in terms of responsiveness.
Yeah, absolutely.
The mapping feature we saw on the dashboard, just to clarify again there, is more about wherever you've got your sites, and we've got a lot of global clients using it, it'll just drop pins on the affected sites that you've included.
Sites, yeah.
So when someone does join the team, it's almost like a sit rep when you log into that dashboard, and you can quickly see, okay, it's these elements in this region that are impacted, and here are my core facts and assumptions or tasks that need to be done.
For sure.
Lovely. Guys, thank you again for your time this morning.
Yeah, I think we've run over time.
Yeah, we've gone a little bit over time. We are sorry. We can talk for hours. But just a reminder, you will be getting a survey later today. Again, we love your feedback. Please let us know how we can improve or suggestions for future topics. And there will be a link to future webinars later on. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you.